Right, we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff today.
Yeah.
The incel phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
one of those internet rabbit holes, that can be super disturbing.
Right.
But also understanding it feels more important now than ever.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's one of those fascinating subcultures where, on the surface, it seems really unsettling in a lot of the rhetoric,
Yeah.
but it's really reflective of a lot of broader societal issues that we could all stand to think about more.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing today.
Yeah.
Total deep dive on this.
Totally.
We've got research papers, we've got forum posts, we've got articles, the whole shebang to try to figure out what this movement is all about, where it came from, and why it even matters.
Yeah, it's interesting. The term incel, it seems like, it's just another internet trend.
Right.
But there's a real ideology behind it that can have real world consequences.
For sure. And first things first, I think we got to define incel, right?
Yeah.
So short for involuntary celibate,
Mm-hmm.
but it's gone way beyond just like, oh, this person's having trouble finding a romantic partner,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's become this whole online subculture.
Right. And I think initially the term could have applied to anybody, right?
Yeah.
Struggling to find a partner, romantic or sexual connection.
Hmm?
But today, yeah, it's more specifically talking about primarily heterosexual men
Right.
who share a very specific set of beliefs.
And those beliefs, I think, are where things start to get really interesting and, frankly, pretty disturbing.
Absolutely.
And one of the big ones is this idea of genetic determinism,
Yeah.
which basically is the belief that your attractiveness is like entirely predetermined by your genes
Mm-hmm.
and therefore your success in finding a partner.
Right. It's out of your control.
Yeah, like if you weren't born with the right genes, you're just destined to be alone.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Is this lack of agency, this lack of feeling like you have any control over your own destiny. And so then it breeds this hopelessness and resentment.
Right, it's this fatalistic view of the world.
Totally.
Like, how do you even function with that mindset?
Right. Well, and that bleak outlook, it leads people down some pretty dark paths, right?
Yeah.
If you feel like there's no way out of this situation.
Absolutely.
And this kind of ties into another one of their core beliefs,
Yeah.
which is this rigid social hierarchy.
Right. This is where we see those terms that we've all probably seen online,
Yep.
like Chad, Stacy, normies.
Yeah, so Chad is at the top of this looks-based hierarchy, right? He's getting all the women,
Yeah.
all the Stacys,
Right.
and then you have like the normies who are just average people.
Right, right.
And then at the very bottom are incels who are completely undesirable.
It's like this, twisted high school popularity system.
Totally.
But way higher stakes.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's all fueled by this deeply misogynistic worldview.
Yeah, absolutely. Incel ideology is fundamentally misogynistic. Women are seen as being shallow, only interested in these so-called genetically superior males,
Right.
which is dehumanizing.
Yeah, it's like reducing women to objects in this whole game.
Absolutely.
And then there's this other controversial concept, female hypergamy.
Yes, and this is basically the belief that women are biologically hardwired to only desire the top, let's say, 20% of men.
Okay, hold on.
And the 80% are just doomed to be alone.
Yeah, that just statistically doesn't seem possible.
Right.
And also just not even remotely logical.
It's an extreme interpretation of evolutionary psychology, right? They take like a grain of truth and turn it into this absolute rule.
Yeah, where are they getting this from?
Well, they talk about the 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
Like it's a mathematical certainty.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no scientific basis for this.
Okay, so we've got this super bleak worldview fueled by all this resentment
Mm-hmm.
and misogyny. Before we get too deep into the psychological aspect of it all, I want to find a couple of other terms that pop up in these online spaces a lot.
Yeah.
And it's red pill and black pill.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these terms actually have their origins in broader online cultures,
Yeah.
but they have very specific meanings within the incel community.
Right. The red pill is the belief that feminism has ruined society
Right.
and given women too much power at the expense of men.
Yeah, so they're waking up to this supposed truth
Right.
that society is rigged against them.
Exactly.
And black pill, that sounds even worse, right?
Yeah, the black pill is like the ultimate stage of nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
It's the belief that absolutely nothing can change their situation.
Right.
Like you're doomed to be alone no matter what.
Yeah, it's a complete surrender to hopelessness.
Yeah.
It's like you're just fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I can see how this would lead to some serious mental health issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so we've laid out this really incredibly bleak outlook.
Mm-hmm.
But what does it actually mean for, like, the people who are buying into this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, like, the psychological and social aspects of all of this.
One of the things that's really striking about incels is the level of social isolation
Right.
that they experience.
That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, if you believe that everybody else is out there living this amazing life,
Mm-hmm.
full of love and sex, and you're doomed to be alone, like,
Mm.
of course that's going to breed some feelings of loneliness
Exactly.
and alienation.
And this is where the internet comes in,
Yeah.
right? Because these online communities, they become these echo chambers
Mm-hmm.
where these beliefs are just constantly reinforced.
Right. So it's not just about being alone physically,
Right.
but it's also like surrounding yourself with people online
Exactly.
who share and validate
Yeah.
these really harmful beliefs.
It's like this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And this leads to really poor mental health.
Yeah.
Studies have shown that incels experience much higher rates of depression, anxiety, other mental health challenges
That makes sense.
compared to the general population.
If you're living in this world of, like, perceived rejection
Mm-hmm.
and hopelessness,
Yeah.
of course it's going to take a toll on your well-being.
Exactly. And then it becomes a cycle, right?
Right.
Because they turn to these maladaptive coping mechanisms.
So instead of trying to improve their situation or get help,
Right.
they're withdrawing further into themselves and these online communities,
Exactly.
which just reinforces that sense of isolation.
Right. And that brings us to the elephant in the room, right?
Okay.
Which is the connection between the incel ideology and violence.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
It's uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but it's really important
Yeah.
to address.
Yeah, this is the really uncomfortable but really important part of this whole phenomena, right?
Yeah, we've seen these horrific cases of mass killings perpetrated by self-identified incels
Mm-hmm.
who explicitly cited their incel beliefs as motivation.
It's a reminder of how dangerous these ideas can be.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the acts of violence themselves, it's like the violent rhetoric
Right.
that is so prevalent.
That's right. You see all these online forums that glorify violence against women,
Yeah.
encourage others to commit these acts.
Mm-hmm.
They often idolize past incel attackers.
Right.
Like they're murders.
Yeah, it's chilling.
It is.
Like to see how they twist reality to justify all of this.
Yeah, it's crucial to understand that this ideology shares a lot of similarities with other forms of extremism.
Okay, no way.
So they create this very distinct in-group, out-group dynamic
Right.
where the incels are the victims
Mm-hmm.
and everyone else, especially women, is the enemy.
Right.
And then they also rely on these crisis and solution narratives
Mm-hmm.
where the crisis is, their lack of sexual fulfillment,
Right.
and the solution is often violence or some kind of societal upheaval.
So it goes way beyond just like loneliness or frustration.
Absolutely.
This is like a full-blown,
It's a distorted worldview.
worldview that can lead to radicalization and violence.
Exactly. And this is where the role of the internet becomes incredibly significant.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because the internet, it seems to be both like a tool for connection
Mm-hmm.
and a breeding ground for this kind of extremism.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, it allows them to connect with each other,
Right.
form these communities,
Mhm.
which on the surface seems like a good thing,
Yeah.
but it also creates those echo chambers that we talked about.
So how do they go from like isolated individuals
Right.
to this like interconnected network of hate?
Well, before the internet, it would have been much harder to find other people who shared their views.
Right.
But now you can go online, find a forum, find a social media group, and you're instantly connected with like-minded individuals.
And they find a sense of belonging, but in all the wrong places.
Exactly. And then once you're in those echo chambers, it just gets amplified.
Yeah.
Right. You're only hearing from people who agree with you.
Right.
And that can really distort your view of the world.
Yeah, for sure. And the anonymity of it all, I think, also plays a role.
Absolutely.
That
Yeah.
people feel emboldened to say and do things that they wouldn't in the real world.
Right. They feel invincible behind their keyboards.
Yeah.
They can say the most hateful things,
Mhm.
and they don't have to face any consequences.
So we've got like easy access to content,
Right.
anonymity,
Mm-hmm.
and this reinforcement of beliefs within echo chambers.
It's a perfect storm
Yeah.
for radicalization.
It's scary.
It is.
And then this brings us back to the incel phenomenon specifically.
Yeah.
Like, how has the internet shaped and influenced like this particular movement?
The internet has allowed them to spread their ideology to a wider audience. It's not just contained to these dark corners of the internet anymore.
Right.
It's gone mainstream.
And I think that's a really important point because it's not just about, like, the people who are actively participating in these communities.
Right.
It's about, like, the potential for these ideas to seep into. Like,
Yeah, mainstream culture,
Yeah,
right? To influence how people think,
right.
how they behave.
It's a much bigger problem than we might realize.
Yeah, it's really important to understand this phenomenon,
Yeah.
to be able to recognize the warning signs
Right.
and to challenge these ideologies when we see them.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning.
Mhm.
Like, where did this all start?
It might surprise you, but the term incel actually has a pretty benign origin.
Really?
Yeah, it was coined in the late 1990s
Okay.
by a woman
Hmm.
who was trying to create a space for people struggling with involuntary celibacy,
Oh.
regardless of gender.
So it started as, like, a more inclusive and supportive community.
Exactly. She wanted to offer support and understanding to those who felt isolated.
Okay, so when did it become what it is today?
Well, over time, the community shifted.
Yeah.
It became overwhelmingly male
Mm-hmm.
and heterosexual.
Right.
And the focus went from, like, support
Yeah.
to blaming women
Mm-hmm.
for their lack of romantic success.
Yeah.
So the original intention was completely lost.
Okay, so when did, like, the really extreme and violent elements start to emerge?
Things really escalated in the late 2010s,
Mm-hmm.
which coincided with the rise of other online hate groups like
Yeah.
the alt-right
Right.
white supremacist movements.
So there's a lot of overlap in their ideologies.
Yeah.
Like, all emphasizing, like, male dominance and blaming societal problems on, feminism and liberal values.
Exactly.
So there's been this cross-pollination of ideas.
Yeah.
It's made the incel ideology even more potent and dangerous.
Yeah, and this led to platforms like Reddit trying to ban incel communities.
All right.
But banning them often just drives them further underground.
Right. Right. It makes them harder to monitor.
Exactly.
They're essentially even more radical.
It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
It's a complex issue.
It is. And I think, like, one of the most pressing questions is, like, why has this movement become so associated with violence?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is driving this shift from a community that, at least initially was focused on support
Right.
to one that's increasingly characterized by hatred and aggression?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer.
Right.
It's this complex interplay of factors
Mm-hmm.
at the individual, relational, and societal levels.
Okay, let's break it down.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the individual risk factors that might contribute to violence?
Research shows that individuals with a history of violence, either as victims or perpetrators,
Right.
are more likely to engage in violent behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Other individual factors might include, like, biological predispositions, like impulsivity, aggression, personal history, maybe childhood trauma, exposure to violence.
Right. And what about, like, substance abuse?
Yeah,
Does
absolutely.
that play a role?
Yeah, substance abuse, especially alcohol and drug addiction,
Mm-hmm.
is a major risk factor
Right.
because it impairs judgment, increases impulsivity,
Mm.
lowers inhibitions.
Right. It's like taking the brakes off.
Exactly.
So you've got these individual vulnerabilities,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not just about the individual, right? There's also relational factors.
Absolutely.
Like, our relationships, especially with our families
Mm-hmm.
and our peers, can really influence our likelihood of engaging in violence.
Yeah.
So, like, what are some of the red flags in terms of family dynamics?
Well, things like authoritarian parenting styles,
Mm-hmm.
where kids are raised with strict discipline and little emotional support,
Right.
that can create an environment where aggression is normalized.
Yeah.
Low parental involvement,
Mm-hmm.
where parents are emotionally detached or absent,
Yeah.
can leave kids feeling neglected and more likely to seek validation and belonging elsewhere.
Yeah. And peer relationships, how do they factor into all this?
Peer influence is incredibly powerful, especially during adolescence
Hmm.
and young adulthood.
Right.
So if you're surrounded by peers who engage in risky or violent behavior,
Mm.
you're more likely to adopt those behaviors.
Right. It's all about fitting in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then social rejection
Mhm.
by peers, especially during those formative years, can lead to feelings of isolation,
Right.
anger, resentment,
Yeah.
which can increase the risk of violence.
So we've got individual vulnerabilities. We've got the influence of our immediate social circles.
Right.
But then you also mentioned societal factors. Like,
Yeah.
what are some of those broader societal issues that contribute to violence?
Well, things like poverty, lack of economic opportunity,
Yeah.
social inequality, all create environments
Yeah.
where violence is more likely to occur.
It's like when people feel hopeless.
And disenfranchised, they're more likely to lash out. Exactly. And you can't ignore the historical context here either. Absolutely. Like systemic racism, including like policies like redlining that led to disinvestment in certain communities, has created conditions where violence is more prevalent. Exactly. It's like these communities lack access to resources, opportunities, support systems. So it makes them more vulnerable to crime and violence.
And it's not just about individual choices.
Right.
It's about the legacy of inequality and discrimination that continues to impact these communities.
Yeah, for sure. And another big factor is just the lack of resources.
Absolutely.
When communities lack access to mental health services, substance abuse treatment, affordable housing, essential resources.
It creates this breeding ground for violence.
Yeah.
Because people who are struggling don't get the help they need.
Right. And that can lead to all sorts of problems.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
And so it's not just about punishing people for engaging in violence.
Right.
It's about addressing those root causes, those systemic issues that make it more likely to occur in the first place.
Exactly.
And I think it's important to point out, even though we're talking about all these risk factors, there are also protective factors that can actually buffer against violence. So what are some of those?
Well, one of the most important is strong family connections. When kids have those positive, supportive relationships, they're less likely to engage in risky or violent behavior.
And what about, like, education? Does that play a role?
Yeah, absolutely. Academic achievement is a significant protective factor.
So creating those environments where young people feel valued and connected and have opportunities can help steer them away from violence.
Absolutely.
And we can't underestimate the power of just, like, community support.
Totally. When communities come together, they coordinate resources, provide opportunities for positive engagement. It creates this sense of cohesion and resilience.
Right, like we all have a role to play.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that this shift, from a supportive community to a violent community often occurs when those risk factors outweigh the protective factors. It's this delicate balance.
Yeah, we need to understand these dynamics to really address the issue.
Absolutely.
So it's complicated.
It is. Welcome back to our deep dive into the incel phenomena.
So we've been talking about all these risk factors, that can push individuals towards violence. But I'm curious about, like, the specific ways that incel communities are actually using the internet.
Right.
We touched on it a little bit before.
Yeah.
But it's worth going a little deeper into how online platforms have, like, really shaped and influenced this movement.
Absolutely. The internet has been, a game changer for this subculture, for better and for worse. It's allowed for this community formation on a scale that wouldn't have been possible before. But it's also created those echo chambers and facilitated the spread of this extremist ideology.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Like, how has the internet actually enabled the formation of these communities? Like, how did we go from, like, isolated individuals to this, like, interconnected network of hate?
Right. Well, before the internet, if you felt isolated or alienated, it would be really hard to find other people who shared your experiences. But with online forums, social media platforms, you can connect with like-minded individuals from all over the world. And that can create a sense of belonging from people who feel marginalized or misunderstood.
It's like they're finding a sense of belonging, but in all the wrong places.
Exactly. And once you're in those echo chambers, your beliefs just get reinforced. You're surrounded by people who agree with you, who validate your anger, your resentment. And so you're less likely to encounter opposing viewpoints and challenge your own beliefs.
And so it creates this, like, distorted view of the world.
Totally,
Yeah.
where your perspective is the only truth.
Yeah, it's like you get trapped in this feedback loop of negativity and hate.
Absolutely.
And then there's that whole anonymity thing,
Right.
which I think makes it even easier to, like, get sucked in.
Anonymity can be liberating in some ways.
Yeah.
But it can also embolden people to say and do things they wouldn't normally do.
In the real world.
Right, exactly.
It lowers those inhibitions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it creates a sense of detachment from the
So
consequences of your actions.
totally. It's like you feel invincible behind your keyboard.
So we've got easy access to, like, really extreme content.
Right.
We've got anonymity. We've got this reinforcement of beliefs within, like, these echo chambers.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, this is a perfect storm for radicalization.
Yeah, and this is why the internet is so difficult to navigate these days, right? Because it can be such a powerful tool for connection and learning.
Right.
But it can also be a breeding ground
Yeah.
for extremism and hate.
It's scary.
It is.
But I guess this brings us back to the incel phenomenon, right? Like, we've seen how the internet has allowed these communities to, like, grow and evolve.
Yeah.
But it's also played a role in, like, spreading their ideology to a wider audience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's much easier now for these extremist ideas to go viral, to reach people who may have never encountered them otherwise.
So it's not just about those who are, like, actively participating in these, like, online communities. It's about, like, the potential for these ideas to, like, seep into mainstream culture.
Totally. It's a much broader problem than we realize.
And influence the way people think and behave.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's much bigger than we think it is.
And that's why it's so important to understand this phenomenon, to recognize the warning signs, to be able to challenge these ideologies when we see them.
It's like we can't just ignore it and hope it goes away.
Right, exactly.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the incel phenomenon.
Yeah, it's been a pretty heavy conversation.
It has.
But, important stuff to talk about.
Absolutely. And we spent a good chunk of time just, like, unpacking the problems. But I want to shift gears a little bit now.
Right.
And talk about potential solutions.
Yeah.
Like, what do we do about this? How do we address this really complex issue?
Yeah.
And stop it from, spreading even further?
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that, like, you can't just shut down websites.
Right.
Ban people from platforms.
Right.
It might seem like a quick fix.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really get to the root of the problem.
Right. Like, why are people drawn to these communities in the first place?
Exactly. You got to treat the disease, not just the symptoms.
Yeah. Okay. So where do we even begin?
Right.
Like, what are some promising approaches to actually counter this ideology?
One approach that a lot of people talk about is early intervention and prevention.
Okay.
So identifying individuals who might be at risk
Mm-hmm.
of going down this path
Yeah.
and providing them with support and resources.
But how do we even identify those people?
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the red flags?
There are some warning signs.
Mm-hmm.
Social isolation,
Right.
difficulty forming relationships,
Yeah.
expressing feelings of inadequacy, hopelessness,
Mm-hmm.
engaging in online communities
Right.
that promote misogyny or violence.
So it's about being aware of those vulnerabilities
Mm-hmm.
and reaching out to people
Yeah.
before they get, too far down that rabbit hole.
Exactly. And this is where, schools, families, communities all play a crucial role. Right.
Because if you can create environments where young people feel valued, connected, supported,
Yeah.
they're much less likely to seek solace
Right.
in these toxic online spaces.
Yeah. So it's about, like, fostering a sense of belonging in, like, a healthy and positive way.
Yeah.
Give them the tools to, like,
Right.
build real connections.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And develop a strong sense of self-worth.
Okay, what about the people who are already, like, deep into this ideology?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there any hope for them?
It's definitely more challenging,
Yeah.
but it's not impossible.
Right.
There are organizations and individuals who specialize in working with extremists and helping them to kind of reevaluate their beliefs,
Okay.
find a path back
Yeah.
to a more, constructive, fulfilling life.
What are some of the, like, key strategies involved in that?
Well, one important element is building rapport and trust.
You know, you can't just lecture someone out of their beliefs.
Right.
You need to create a safe space for them.
Yeah.
To express their anger, their frustration, their pain without judgment.
So it's like meeting them where they're at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And trying to understand their perspective.
Yeah, build that bridge.
Yeah, and then you can start to challenge their beliefs.
Right.
Not through confrontation, but through thoughtful dialogue, critical thinking exercises.
Right.
Expose them to alternative perspectives.
It's got to be a really delicate process.
It is. It requires a lot of patience and skill.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's crucial work.
Yeah.
Because every individual that you can kind of de-radicalize is a victory against hate and violence.
Yeah, what about online platforms themselves? Like, what can they do to prevent the spread of this stuff?
They definitely have a responsibility to take action against this content,
Right.
create safer environments, you know, implementing stricter policies against hate speech, harassment,
Right.
investing in content moderation, detection technologies, working with law enforcement.
So it's like a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Combining like technology, policy, human intervention.
Absolutely. They have a social responsibility to protect their users from harm.
But we talked about this earlier, like just banning these communities can sometimes backfire.
Right.
You know, drive them further underground.
Yeah.
Make them even harder to track.
Exactly. So you need a more nuanced approach. Yeah. It's not just about censorship.
Right.
It's about creating spaces for dialogue.
Right.
For challenging those ideologies, promoting alternative viewpoints.
It's about creating a more like balanced online ecosystem.
Where these voices aren't amplified.
Right.
But they're not completely silenced either.
Right.
You need that balance.
Yeah.
You need to foster critical thinking, media literacy.
So people can see through the BS.
Exactly. And empathy and understanding are so important.
Yeah.
You know, we need to recognize that these individuals, even the ones who hold these hateful beliefs, they're often hurting. They're alienated and they're desperately searching for connection.
And it's really easy to dehumanize them.
Yeah.
But we got to remember, they're still human beings.
Absolutely.
Who are struggling with their own pain and confusion.
And while we should never condone or excuse their actions, we need to try to understand what drives them.
Yeah, those root causes.
Absolutely.
This has been a lot.
It has.
I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about. This incel phenomenon, it's complex.
It is.
It's disturbing.
Yeah.
But it's something that we absolutely cannot ignore.
We can't.
It's a reminder that the internet, while it's this incredibly powerful tool for connection, communication, it can also be this breeding ground for extremism and hate.
It's a call to action for all of us to be more vigilant.
Yeah.
Challenge these ideologies. Create more inclusive, supportive communities, both online and offline.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
We hope that this conversation has been informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit unsettling.
A little bit.
But as we've said, like, understanding these issues is that first step towards addressing them.
Absolutely.
So keep the conversation going. Challenge your own biases.
Yeah.
Be an advocate for empathy and understanding.
So important.
And remember, even though this deep dive is over,
the
conversation doesn't have to be.
Keep learning.
Keep learning. Keep questioning.
Keep questioning.
And keep fighting for a more just and equitable world.
Yeah, absolutely.